In this video, we are going to look at 6 activities you can use to practice the preterite versus the imperfect in your Spanish classes, how you can review the verb forms, and practice the concept with your students. Let's jump right in. Hi, it's Ashley, aka Señorita Spanish, where I provide easy-to-use resources to save you time, energy, reduce your workload, and your stress level while you lesson plan for your Spanish classes. I'm so glad you're here. If you're new, make sure you click that subscribe button and ring that bell to get notified of all new content I create for you in the future. And everything that I mentioned in this video will be linked in the description box below. So let's get started. Preterite versus imperfect is a concept that consistently shows up in our Spanish textbooks, and it can be something that's really challenging for our students to master. In this video, I'll share 6 activities you can do with your students to practice the preterite and the imperfect tenses, and to help your students deciding when to use one or the other. Even though practicing language skills really isn't the best form of teaching a language, especially not when we're talking about acquiring the language. Sometimes we work for districts that require us to use certain textbooks or require us to use certain assessments that have students memorize these sorts of rules and forms. And if that's the case, we want our students to be successful. So hopefully these practice activities help you check those boxes while you are serving your students. I'm curious, what level do you usually work on this concept with your students? Is it Spanish 2, Spanish 3? Do you start it in 2? They teach it into 3? Comment below and let me know, when do you start teaching your students the concept of preterite versus imperfect? I'd love to hear. So when we're first starting preterite versus imperfect in my classes, I like to begin with a review of the preterite and the imperfect tenses separately, because they usually are introduced to this the first semester of Spanish 2. They've been working with preterite for a while, they've been working with the imperfect for a while, and especially with the preterite, because there's so many irregular forms that were kind of just like shoved into them all semester long, I like to give them a little bit of review of them both before we dive into mixing the 2 tenses. And one of my favorite ways to do this is to play either El Toro or Cucharas, or we'll play both and I'll let my students pick which one they're gonna do. Cucharas is just spoons, right? If you've played spoons, just the party game, all they're gonna do is they're gonna look at a card and pass it along until they collect all forms of the verb, and then they grab a spoon. The last person to grab a spoon loses the round. El Toro is really, really similar. It's a fast-paced trading game. Everybody has the same amount of cards in their hand, and they're going to call out however many cards they'd like to trade. Everybody is playing at the same time. So let's say if I have 2 forms of tener in my hand, I'm going to yell out dos, 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 dos until somebody else also wants to trade me 2. Then I will take the 2 cards from them. The point of the game is to have all 6 or all 5, if you don't teach vosotros, forms of the verb in your hand, and then you stand up and you will say El Toro, because that's the name of the game. I do have a blog post where I detail how to play that. I will make sure to link it in the description. The next thing we do is we just play with this set of scrambled sentences. Towards the beginning of the unit, I will just give them the pieces they need and the English translation to put the words in order. Later on in the unit, we will play the same exact set again, but now they're going to get 2 verb forms, so they have to choose which form of the verb makes the most sense depending on the context of the sentence that they have in front of them. I do something similar with our first round of corre en círculos. We begin by just focusing on choosing preterite or the imperfect, so they get the 2 options already conjugated for them. Later on in the unit, we'll play again, only this time they get the infinitive, so they'll have to choose preterite or imperfect and conjugate the verb. Usually at one point in time in the unit, we'll do one form of corre, and later on in the unit, we'll play a different variation of it. I have like 8 different ways that I play this game, so it's not like they're like, oh my gosh, we're doing this again. So we're just doing it again, but we are practicing the skills in a slightly different way to reinforce the skills one more time. If you're not familiar with how to play corre en círculos, I'll link my playlist on it for you here, so that way you can learn how to play, how I introduce it to students, and see several variations I do on it in class. My personal favorite is the classroom-wide scavenger hunt, but I also really like the mini puzzle and the relay race version, so I will link that for you here for you to go check out. A great fast finisher to a day playing corre en círculos is a maze game. And if you're not familiar with maze games, I have a blog post on 10 ways to use them in your Spanish class. My personal favorite is as a follow-up to corre, but biased. In these games, students read the sentence or the prompt. Then they look at the paths and they have to choose, okay, which path has the correct answer. And as they choose, they get closer and closer and closer to the end of the maze until they have made their way out. It's super easy for you to correct, and they really get great feedback, because along the way there are purposeful dead ends where they might get to a prompt and they'll say, well, none of these answers are correct. To say, well, you probably took a wrong turn along the way, so you can go back and revisit your answers and see if you can figure it out. Another option to reinforce the skill of choosing between preterite and imperfect and using them accurately is task cards. And task cards are kind of like an oldie but a goodie. Print them, cut them, hang them up around your room. Students will walk around and answer the questions. You can either have them answer all of the task cards, or you can tell them to choose a certain number of cards, and this way builds in a little bit of student choice and power, also helps you to build in some differentiation for them. When they finish with the task cards, because they're going to finish at all different times, I like to just have a set of boom cards handy for them. And so what I'll do is through the LMS is I will send them a link to a set of boom cards to practice preterite versus imperfect some more, and they'll just sit down and work on them independently. They can easily work through these on their own pace, and boom cards gives them immediate feedback. So as they're answering questions, it's going to tell them, ding, you got it, or no, you didn't. Go back and try again. If you're not familiar with boom cards, I have a ton of videos explaining what they are, how to use them, what they're great for in your Spanish classes. I will link my playlist on boom cards for you here so you can go check them out. The gist is that they are digital task cards that allow you to practice listening, reading, and writing skills with your students. They're auto-correcting to give your students immediate feedback, and they're really, really nice to use as a quick, fast finisher, review, or any sort of practice with your Spanish students. And if you want to try out my set on preterite versus imperfect boom cards, I'll make sure to link to it in the description of this video below so you can just try out a few cards and see what you think. There's all the activities that I have for you to practice preterite versus imperfect with your Spanish classes. Thanks so much for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, or a thumbs down if you didn't. Don't forget to click that subscribe button and ring that bell so you get notified of all new content that I create for you in the future. Oh, and if this video was helpful for you, consider clicking that share button and sending it to a Spanish teacher friend so it can also maybe hopefully help them too. Do you do anything in particular to practice preterite versus imperfect in your Spanish classroom? If so, I'd love to hear about it. Send me a DM over on Instagram. I can't wait to hear from you.